Hey guys, it's Danny. Today, we're gonna play with the Hoya. Yep, it's been a while, right? If you're older on my channel, maybe, I don't know, about a decade old on my channel, you might remember we did start off with a few Hoyas that I managed to bring with me to my new country. But for the past few years, you didn't see a lot of Hoya content on my channel. Well, I did focus a lot more on orchids, but I do want to get back into Hoyas and a few other houseplants that I personally really enjoy. And today we're gonna kick off that new project together with a new project here on my channel. I'm gonna make a sort of a series of very basic houseplant care tips for beginners, obviously in my own personal style, and I decided to start off with Hoyas. I do have a few care tips to give you, and we're gonna do more than that. I'm gonna focus all of my tips today around not having time. Do you have time? I'm sure most of you don't. I don't have time either. But there are a few things that can make our life with Hoyas and other houseplants a little bit easier. And I'm gonna tell you all about it today. Today's video, together with this brand new series, is sponsored by repotme.com, my long-term collaborator, which offers you not only orchid supplies, but also houseplant supplies. Some of the things that I will be using today are provided by them. But if you are looking for soils, pots, fertilizers, or accessories, RepotMe does actually have them. From succulents to African violets, philodendrons, Hoyas, and other houseplants, you can definitely find very good quality supplies on RepotMe. I have been trying and using them for years at this point. Reason why this collaboration is so long, so I'll link you down below to their website. Feel free to check them out at any time. And with that said, before we start, don't forget to give this video a like. That lets me know that this video was useful and that you enjoyed this new series. And hey, why not subscribe? I do post plant content multiple times a week. Alrighty, so with that said, let me just start with telling you what I have here. This is a very common Hoya. It is a carnosa, but as you can see, it has a bit of variegation. Isn't that cute? This is a Hoya carnosa Crimson Princess. There is also a Crimson Queen. The difference between them is that one of them has the variegation, the light coloration on the leaf in the center. This is the Crimson Princess, and the other one has the variegation on the margin. That is the Queen. What I noticed with the Queen is that sometimes it can actually produce completely white leaves. Both of them are beautiful, both of them are very common in flower shops, and both of them are super easy to keep in a home, especially if you don't have time, believe it or not. So I'll start with the beginning. I'll start with repotting because I really don't like this soil, and then we'll get into the culture tips. Let's start with the pots. To be fully honest with you, Hoyas can grow in whatever pot you like best. Clay pots, plastic pots, opaque pots, translucent or transparent pots like an orchid pot, self-watering pots, you name it. They can grow in all of these types of pots. Obviously, each of these setups will have their own little particularities that may or may not work with your environment, but generally speaking, a Hoya can grow in any of these options. But as I was saying at the beginning of the video, this tutorial is geared for people who don't have time, such as myself, so I'm gonna get rid of some of these. I'm not gonna be using these guys. I will pot my Hoya in a self-watering pot. And excuse the fluctuating light. The light engineer acts funny today, aka the sun. So between these two types of self-watering pots, I will not be using the plastic one, I'll be using the clay one. And this is a pot that I did receive from repotme.com. It's one of my most favorite type of decorative pots. And apart from aesthetics, the reason why I'm gonna be using this pot is one, for the self-watering feature, which will allow me to not waste my time watering all that often. And second, for the weight. Having heavier pots with Hoyas is typically a good thing due to the way they grow, and we'll get to that. Now, just because I'm gonna use a self-watering pot doesn't mean that Hoyas are very thirsty plants. Actually, they are incredibly drought tolerant. I don't know if you can tell how dry the soil is, but it's pretty dry because I just don't have time to water it. So by no means am I saying these guys are thirsty. They're actually super forgiving with people who skip a watering day. So if that sounds like you, maybe Hoyas are your kind of plant. But you can imagine drought tolerance plus self-watering pots equals love. However, there is a little bit of a caveat when it comes to self-watering pots and plants like Hoyas. The soil we're gonna use cannot be compacted because that will definitely suffocate the roots. So we need to make the soil quite airy and lightweight. Luckily for us, that's a very easy task to do. I have grown Hoyas in a multitude of types of soils. I did not find them particularly fussy when it comes to the soil you're gonna use. So whatever all-purpose soil you have, I think it will be great, but in order to make it a little fluffier, a little lighter, it is a great idea to mix it with perlite. Perlite is a soil amendment that you can find in flower shops or garden centers and also on Repot Me, which consists of tiny white pebbles which are actually spongy and they're made out of volcanic material. Since I will be using a self-watering pot, I want to be on a safe side, so I'm gonna mix these two ingredients in equal measures. So 50% perlite, 50% all-purpose soil. My soil is also pre-fertilized. Most all-purpose mixes on the market are, but you can find some that are not if you prefer to make your own mix. Now, if you don't have perlite, but you have sponge rock, that absolutely works as well. And if you don't have neither of those, even orchid bark can be a great aerator for your soil. Next up, time to unpot the Hoya. I personally do like to repot plants when they're not very wet, when they're kind of dry. Want to know why? This is why. That was effortless, and there's not a whole bunch of mud on my potting tray. What I will do, however, is remove at least the top layer of soil. In the top layer is typically where you're gonna find the fungus gnats and their eggs and larvae, if there are any, which most of the times houseplants will have fungus gnats. In my case, I do see that here I had two other stems which were dry. I will remove them because they're not alive anymore. I will try to disturb the root ball as little as possible, but I will remove all of this top layer. Not only pests can be harbored in the top layer of soil, but also older leaves, dried leaves, all sorts of organic debris. Our plant pots are not compost piles, so it's really not a good idea to leave too much organic material inside. So I'm also going to gently massage the roots a little. Sounds funny, but yeah, pretty much that's what I'm doing, just to loosen them up a little bit to not have this pot shape. So I'm gonna push this to the side. I'm not going to reuse it. I really don't know how old it is, and my plant actually has a pretty nice root system. I also see that I do have 3 individual stems here. Now, if you'd like to have multiple plants throughout your home, now is the time to actually separate these stems. You can pot them individually. In this way, pretty much you can propagate your plant. Typically, nurseries like to place multiple stems in one pot to make the plant bushier. So it's up to you if you want to keep all of the stems in one pot or you want to separate them and just plant them in different pots. I will keep mine together. And now we can go ahead and place the plant in the new pot. Before we do that though, a side note. This type of self-watering pot relies on the porosity of the interior pot, which is not glazed. So how it works is you have water in the reservoir which will seep in through the pores of the clay to the interior pot. Now, in time, and especially if you happen to have harder water, these pores can get clogged. And I did have a few viewers telling me that their self-watering clay pots, no matter the brand they were using, in time stopped wicking pretty much the water from the reservoir. And there is a very simple way to fix this. All we need to do is create a drainage hole and use a wick to access the water in the reservoir and deliver it inside. I do have a video in which I show you how to drill this hole. Mind you, in that video, I used a normal drill bit. You can use diamond drill bits to create this hole, which are far more efficient. So if you've ever had issues with these types of pots, this is the way to fix them pretty much forever. So what I will do first is feed my wick through the drainage hole. And by the way, this is a microfiber wick. I am reusing old kitchen rags that I'm not using anymore. I wash them and I reuse them as wicks. When you use wicks, it's a good idea to use something synthetic, not organic, such as cotton, because in a short while, it will just rot and you will remain with a potted plant without a wick. So I will add a layer of my soil inside. I'm gonna hold the wick up. And afterwards, I'm just gonna lay the wick in a sort of circular shape on the bottom of my pot, and then I will place my plant inside. And look at that, it is actually a perfect fit. I I think I like this side of the pot better. And now, of course, it's just a matter of adding soil into the pot. Now, as you will discover probably, especially if you massage the roots and they're not very neatly shaped anymore, you will discover that the soil will tend to just fall to the sides of the pot. All you need to do is use a bamboo skewer, insert it gently into the pot, and just wiggle it a bit. And in this way, you're gonna make the soil fall in between the roots, eliminating the very big air pockets, which in the case of Hoyas are not necessarily what you need. And of course, especially for self-watering pots, which rely on the soil being very even to be evenly moist. So I'm gonna go ahead and add soil in this manner until I reach the top of my pot. And voila, we are done. I also cleaned up my tray a little bit. Now it is time to water your plant. Even though in a self-watering pot, you can just go ahead and add water to the reservoir, the first time when you pot your plant, I would suggest you water from the top just to make sure that the soil arranges itself properly and that, again, we don't have very big air pockets. Now, many people will suggest to pre-moisten the soil because most of the times when you add water to very dry soil, it's just going to repel it initially, which this soil does as well. But I personally like to repot my plants with the soil dry because I can make it go in between the roots and in those big air pockets much easier than if it was damp. What I also like to do is leave a little bit of space between the edge of the pot and the level of the soil so that I can make a little bit of a pool of water here that will not spill over and just let it slowly drain. It is absolutely fine to go to the sink and water the plant properly, let it drain very well, and then just put in the reservoir whatever quantity you want. But for the sake of making this video pretty, I'm just gonna be using this wonderful watering can that I really like, again, from Repot Me. Now, I put a lot of water. I'll be sure to remove some of this from the reservoir, but I'm just gonna let it really soak in for about an hour, and then I'll see if I have too much water in the reservoir. Good. Now that this is done, let's talk about some care tips, which is the easy part, thankfully. You should rewater your Hoya when it's dry, in my opinion. I would not let this plant be moist or soggy all of the time, or the first 1 inch of the soil dry and then moist. No, I would let it dry out until it becomes slightly shrivelly. As I was saying, this particular Hoya is very drought tolerant. And if you let the soil properly dry, what you will do is make sure that those very tiny air pockets, which are good, not like the big air pockets, you make sure that you let them completely empty and become full of air again, which is really important for the roots. It prevents waterlogging, it helps with nutrient absorption, which is impaired if there isn't enough oxygen around the root area. There are a lot of benefits in letting soils dry out as much as the plant can handle. Obviously, do not super dehydrate your Hoya. As you can see, my Hoya doesn't look at all very dehydrated. It has very mild signs that it was a little bit too dry. And by the way, I did let it dry out a lot for the purpose of this video. Typically, I water it a little bit sooner than that. So when the reservoir empties, do not water the Hoya in this setup because inside it's still wet. What you can do, again, if you don't want to poke a finger in and have all sorts of soils underneath your fingernails, which I can totally understand, I hate it too. You can use either a crayon, either a bamboo stick or skewer, and just insert it into the soil. When you take it out, it should be dry. If it's still moist, no need to water the Hoya. Obviously, these care tips might be different for other species of Hoyas, but for the carnosa and the pubic calyx, which is another very common Hoya at the flower shop, letting them dry out is actually beneficial, particularly in self-watering pots. If you have a clay pot which is porous, you might not want to let them all that dry for all that long, because clay pots breathe a lot, they tend to lose water very fast. So let the little skewer tell you when things are dry, then it's time to water. The way to water, up to you. You can do what I just did and just pour enough water to have some water in the reservoir, or you can go to the sink, completely water the pot, or you can just add some water into the reservoir. But do please make sure after 24 hours, make sure that the water has been soaked up. Because depending on the soil, some soils will not be very wicking. So if you have that type of soil, which is not wicking, just water from above. But if your soil is good quality, you can add the water in the reservoir and it should be just fine. Okay, this was the hardest part, you guys. Let's talk about temperature. Whatever temperature you're comfortable in, it will be comfortable in. End of story. Obviously, avoid extremes. If you're very hot, it will not like it. If you're very cold, it will not like that either. Light-wise, this type of Hoya is not picky. It does enjoy bright light, but I would not place it in direct sunshine. I did have quite a few Hoyas burn or not grow very well if the light was very strong. A bright shade situation is ideal. If you have a little bit of sun in the morning or in later afternoon, that's great. You can even use a sheer curtain to block a little bit of that sun. Or if you have artificial light, I think your Hoya will grow just as well. If the light is bright enough though, you will notice your Hoya developing a bit of a red tinge. If the leaves are green, they will become a little darker or a little bit more purple. And if they have variegation, well, that variegation can become pink. That is the anthocyanin pigment that has a role in protecting the leaf against strong light. It just happens to also look very pretty. I would definitely not worry about humidity. These Hoyas are very forgiving and easy to grow. Even though some other species might not be, these guys really are. So I would not go out of my way to arrange a humidifier or humidity trays or things of the sorts. And by the way, if you notice the outfit change, yes, my camera stopped recording yesterday. I didn't notice, so I have to re-record part of this video. It's okay. Now, as you can see, I choose to let the Hoya just droop down. But you can also make it vine. This is actually a vining plant. If you use the trellis, you will see your Hoya will start to swirl around the stakes, and in my experience that will make it bloom a little bit better. I know it's quite appealing to have drooping down plants or hanging plants like this, and if you use your Hoyas for decorations, you can definitely do so. But if you're more keen on flowering, it's just my experience that if they have something to climb on, even if you swirl it around the trellis, it's just gonna bloom a little bit better. And since Hoyas can grow pretty large, it is a good idea to actually use heavier pots. So whether you're letting them droop down or using a trellis, they can become top heavy. Hence why I actually chose the heavier clay pot today rather than the plastic pot. Hoyas can bloom throughout the year if they receive good care. There isn't one trick to make them bloom, just treat them properly. But I have to warn you about the blooms. As beautiful as they are and as fragrant as they can be, they can produce droplets of nectar which are sweet and very sticky. They can fall on surfaces, and if you have a very special piece of furniture, I would definitely place a paper or something under the Hoya or just move the Hoya. It can also attract ants because of that sweet nectar. So keep that in mind when it comes to flowering. Also, each peduncle, which is the flower formation, can rebloom. So don't cut away those formations. I don't know why you would, but try not to damage them in any way because they will produce new buds and new flowers from the very same locations. And honestly, that is about it for the basic care. Other than that, you just have to tune a little bit your care in accordance to your environment and even your lifestyle. Hoyas are not complicated plants, and I hope I didn't call them orchids throughout this video. I might have, sorry if that happened. But they can pose a bit of a challenge when it comes to growing because they can become large. Do you see these tendrils? This is how they grow. If you want your Hoya to evolve and grow and bloom, don't cut them. Just let them vine. And if you do want to propagate your Hoya, you can actually cut these, place them in soil or other propagation setups. That's a subject for a different time. But continuously trimming your Hoya is not necessarily the best thing for it. You should let these tendrils just grow because they will form the new leaves, the new shoots, secondary shoots, and also the flowers. Repotting should be done at least once every 2 years or so, or when you see that the pot just dries out super fast or your Hoya just stops growing all of a sudden, maybe just does not have enough space in the pot. case in which you should consider a repot, but for maintenance purposes, at least once every 2 years or so, if not once a year. And really, that's about it for today and for Hoyas. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new. If you have Hoyas, let us know in a comment, how do you take care of them? What setups do you have that work great in your environment? So thank you so much for watching, and thank you Repot Me for sponsoring this video and this brand new series with houseplants. We'll see how it goes. We're gonna have succulents, African violets, and all sorts of other plants that I know a thing or two about. I'm not gonna start talking about roses all of a sudden. And bonus, even orchids, because yes, there are some terrestrial orchids which maybe you didn't know they're orchids. Maybe you just thought they were some sort of other houseplant. But yeah, we're gonna talk about all of them in this series in very easy to understand tutorials. Right, so with that said, I hope you'll have a great day. If you wanna follow me on social media, just search for me. I am at MissOrchidGirl pretty much everywhere. But if you're into tutorials, subscribe to this channel. I post multiple times a week. Alrighty, so that said, I'll see you next time. Bye.